In this project series, we're going to be working on the... Actually, let me pull it up real quick. No, that's not it. No. Still no. Definitely not. There it is. Actually, wait a second. There we go. The Trabant in today's episode is sponsored by Tite-Reach extension wrenches. And specifically what we're going to be doing is rebuilding the Trabant's engine, because for the entire time I've owned this car, it hasn't run right. It's been running lean, it's been doing other funky things, and recently it's developed new holes in the cylinders that aren't supposed to be there. Plus, I would imagine a lot of you haven't seen the inside of a Trabant engine before, so it might be an interesting new experience for you and for me. Before I do anything with this engine, it has to come out of the car, so I might as well get started with that. So this exhaust is not supposed to hang down like this. There is an actual rubber support here that I replaced at one point, but it didn't matter because it broke again. I shall mark this as the first time I need to break out the wacky stick on this project. Conveniently, all of the oil that's gathered on the exhaust is acting as anti-seize for all the nuts that are on here. Okay, it's gonna drop. Oh, okay, there we go. Something flew off into the distance. Let's see if I can find that later. Oh boy. Oh! Pow! Hey, I got the exhaust off. That's something. And here's the front muffler. This is the silencer assembly, and this big tube up here is for the heater inside the car, because the heat is just air blowing past the heat shroud around this first. I don't know if you'd call it a muffler, a silencer, or maybe just an expansion chamber, but the heater is just this shroud running across the exhaust and running up into the car through this thing. Perfect use for this thing. And then open the floodgate. This is pretty obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. The Trabant is a very simply constructed vehicle. Undo the speedometer cable. I would undo the tachometer cable, but that doesn't exist. How long has that been loose? The exhaust is loose. The exhaust manifold. Wow, that's a problem. I wonder how long that's been like that. One thing I really like about the Trabant is the shifter, because it's literally just this bent rod going straight into the shifter, so it's extremely direct. I mean, one of the best shifters I've ever used, which is an odd thing to say in a car like this. I can't seem to get this little slip joint off the tube here, and because I whacked it with a hammer, I flanged it out, and it made it even more impossible to get off. And I've decided, since I've done a little research and I can buy this tube readily on the internet, I'm going to cut my losses and cut the tube in half. And there we go. This engine and transmission unit are not light enough to lift out of here by hand, but they are light enough that I can get away with using thin ratchet straps. You know how many times I've heard people on the internet saying, the Trabant engine's small, you can just pick it up with your hands and put it on the workbench. No, you can't. You cannot do that. Unless you're very, very strong, you cannot do that. I believe it's free now. And here it is on my workbench. Majestic, isn't it? Now, I've already made a huge discovery about this engine, but I'll get to that in a minute. First, I need to separate the geary bit from the powery bit. Let's use this piece of wood and a clamp to hold it against. All right, let's see if we can get this off now. Oh, wow, that just literally fell right off. All right, it's time to carry this very small and liftable gearbox to out of camera shot land. Actually, hang on a second. I'm back, because I just realized this is a whole 4-speed transmission I'm holding in my hands. All right, let's go back. That was all I had to say. With the tiny transmission out of the way, here's the engine all by its lonesome. Here's the front side. Here's the passenger side. This engine is so light. Here's the back side. And here is the driver's side. Unless I got the passenger and driver's side reversed. Let me think about this a second. No, I didn't. Here's the front side again. I could legitimately buy a Lazy Susan to put this engine on. Now to continue with engine disassembly. I know it's a bit of an overused meme, but I actually lost my 10mm socket. How? Where did it go? This just in, I found my 10mm socket again. It was hiding in the slot for the 13mm socket. I'm a very organized person, except when I'm not. Forgot to take out the spark plugs that are probably absolutely filthy, because it's a Trabant. The spark plugs are never clean except before they go in the engine. Oh, how's that for a dirty plug? Look at that thing. I could probably clean these up, but I buy so many spares I'm just going to throw them in the trash. Prediction, when I loose this, the engine is going to fall forward. So let's just brace it. Yep, there we go. Not too badly, but it did fall forward a bit. Let's remove this fan. This fan is actually only held on there by this strap. The strap isn't just for looks. I kind of want to, this looks like a jet turbine. I kind of want to buy a bunch of these and use them as, I don't know, exhaust extraction fans or something. That would be kind of cool. Look at that. Now we should remove the engine's mask. No longer shall it hide. There we go. As I previously alluded to, just in the time it took me to get this engine out of the car and onto the workbench, I made a discovery. No, not the Land Rover kind. I've been saying this whole time in previous videos, even at the beginning of this video, that this engine has developed new holes in the back of the cylinders. And the reason I thought that is because when the engine was running in the car, I could shine a light down in there and see exhaust flying out the back of the engine where there are no exhaust exiting orifices. You can even see the backs of the cylinders are coated with oily exhaust residue. Now that led me to believe that there were new holes back there that shouldn't be there. But I've discovered upon taking the engine out that there are no holes back there. What's really happened is this. The exhaust manifold shook loose. So there's a massive exhaust leak around here. You can even see all the oily residue on the exhaust manifold itself. And exhaust was escaping around the cylinders because there's an air shroud around all of this, and out the back of the engine, which is causing the oily residue buildup back here, the exhaust flying out the back of the engine, the loud noises, the whole lot of it. So I've been proven wrong, and frankly I thought the whole new holes in the cylinders theory sounded preposterous anyway. How would that even happen? And how would it happen to both cylinders at the exact same time in the same place? It really didn't make any sense. But now I've completely proven myself wrong. And no, it doesn't really void the point of this whole engine rebuild, because I have several other things in this engine that I want to take a look at, but we'll get to them when we get to them. In case you're wondering what this shroud is over the exhaust manifold, imagine your engine fans right here, because that's where it would normally be. This is the intake, this is the outlet. Air blows over this for your cabin heat. And this is why if you own a Trabant and you use the heater, you pray for no exhaust leaks here. And off we come. And my God, look how oily the bottom of this thing is. There we go. That's not a lot of torque holding those on, because it's the head bolt on a Trabant. Easy. And off with your head. All right. Let's take a look at it. My side first. I get to see. Wow, that's fascinating. Look at that. Oh, I dropped all the nuts. Oh, that was stupid. Some carbon buildup here and a little bit here, but really it's not bad. When I replaced these cylinders, you can see they're a little bit newer. I replaced them about 3 years ago, and when I did that, this was just all carboned up, and I cleaned the heads, and it's not too bad since then. I think, anyway. And this carbon just kind of scrapes right off with my finger. A little bit worse on the top of the piston, but again, not terrible. Here's the other head. Again, same sort of carbon pattern. I can scrape it off my finger. Now, when I replaced these cylinders about 3 years ago, I did it with the engine still in the car because I didn't have any tools or much garage space to work with. And getting to these little nuts that hold the cylinders in place was a bit of a nightmare, especially on the back of the engine back here. I had to just reach in and go by feel, basically. But now, the engine's on a workbench in front of me, and it's a million times easier. Now to remove the privacy curtain between the two cylinders. I believe they put this in place so each cylinder doesn't get performance anxiety from the other cylinder watching it. All right, let's start with jug 2. Did I forget something? No. And there we go. Inspect the inside of it. Look, keep doing that. I need to collect the washers before I just dump them. Now, jug number 1. And there we go. Now let's have a look inside the cylinder here. Obviously, there's no holes in it. Well, aside from the intake and the exhaust ports, there's no holes in the cylinders that aren't supposed to be there, like I stupidly thought before, but I doubt you'll be able to pick this on camera. Even the honing pattern is still good in these cylinders. And like I said, these cylinders, I replaced them 3 years ago, so they shouldn't be bad anyway. But these will not need replacing because they're perfectly fine. Nothing wrong here. You might be able to see the honing pattern on that side. Yep, so these are good. No replacement needed here for either cylinder. Now to check if the crankshaft bearings are good. Everything in here is a roller bearing because it's 2-stroke, there's no oil pressure, so on and so forth. And to test the roller bearings, I just give it a little wiggle. And on the top of the pistons, there's basically no play at all in this one. Here, there's a tiny bit more play, but again, I don't think it's a problem. And here's where a lack of knowledge comes into play because, or it becomes a problem, because there's a little bit of side-to-side play on the con rods on both sides. But this is a Trabant. I know the tolerances are low, but I don't know if that's too much play or not. So I'm going to have to consult the people of the internet that own other Trabants and see if that is too much or not. It doesn't really feel that bad, and in addition, if I try to move the con rods up and down, there isn't any play at all. It's just the side-to-side wiggle. But there's no play up and down. So I'll have to find that out later. Let's just continue with the rest of the engine teardown. If I didn't mention it, this carburetor is also basically brand new. I bought it 3 years ago. Brand new, pre-tested, pre-tuned for the engine. And there shouldn't be any issue with it. It's all brand new on the inside. Just dirty on the outside. Oh, there's still gas in it, you stupid moron. Let's see if I can get these pistons off without damaging anything. Just 2 little spring clips on each side, and then the whole thing just sort of presses into place. Again, using roller bearings. The last time I installed and removed these piston connection rod things, I don't actually know what they're called, I just used a socket and a wacky stick and kind of braced it against my hand. I don't want to do that this time because that's a lot of sidewards force I'm putting on this conrod bearing here, and I would like to preserve that. So what I did, so I made my own tool here out of some scrap materials. I cut a slot in the board here for a steering wheel puller, I think it is. I think it's a steering wheel puller. And I kind of dug out some grooves and a hole on this other chunk of wood here to accept the other side of the piston. It just fits over the piston like so. Unscrew this a bit. Still uses a socket to push out the rod bearing thing. Make sure this hole is lined up so the rod comes out the other side, and just start cranking on it. I literally just finished making this. It took me about 2 hours, something like that. I don't know if this will work. Let's find out. Oh my gourd, it's working beautifully. Is it coming out this? It is! Oh man, I'm a genius. It's a little bit crooked, but I used scrap wood and scrap steel, so, you know, a little bit of crookediness is perfectly excusable. This is so much better than hitting it with a hammer, and this tool I made was free, except for all the parts I had to buy. Pull the socket out, and the piston comes with it. And here is the roller cage, just sitting here in the conrod. This is how the piston connects to the conrod with iron roller bearing. Make sure the hole lines up, which it doesn't. There we go, now it does. And continue with the unknown name of object extraction. As always, I am not a mechanic. This video is for entertainment and not instruction. I don't really know what I'm doing. Heck, I don't even know the name of this little piece I'm extracting. Connects to the piston of the conrod, and that's about the extent of my knowledge. Socket extracted. Now, the piston comes out freely. There we go. Now, I discovered a problem with this engine that I'll show you in a second, but first let me explain something about two-stroke engines in general, and specifically the Trabant engine, just in the event you're not aware how this stuff works. In a two-stroke engine, like this Trabant engine, the fuel-air mixture is drawn in through the intake into the crankcase and then pushed up into the combustion chamber around the sides of the cylinders. If you didn't know, that's why you mix the oil with the gas in a two-stroke engine, because the gas is being drawn through the crankcase, and that's how all the bits get lubricated, by the oil that's mixed in with the gas. A lot of two-stroke engines will have something called a reed valve, which is just a one-way flap or valve. That valve seals off the intake, so when the piston goes on its downward stroke, the fuel-air mixture is pushed up into the combustion chamber instead of out of the crankcase. The Trabant doesn't have reed valves. It also doesn't just have an open intake like a lot of two-stroke engines do. What it has instead are rotary valves, which are just little metal vanes that are pinned to the crankshaft and right around with it. And they just swipe past the little intake port on the crankcase here. You can see it as I turn around the engine, just swiping past, and open and close that little port. It's a very simple system. Now, the problem with my Trabant's engine are these rotary valves. The problem with this rotary valve, as you can see here, is it doesn't seal against the port. So that's going to allow air to rush back out the intake, which is probably the cause of my backfiring issue. I don't know if the valve itself is bent or the springs are dead or what's going on here, but I'll find out when I take it apart. The problem with the other rotary valve isn't gap. It's sealed against this port just fine. There's no issue there. The problem with it is it's all wallered out on the guide pins, so it flops back and forth. The other one does it a little bit, but nowhere near as bad as this one. So both of these rotary valves are kaput, and I need to replace both of them. Oh God. Off with the generator, or alternator, I'm not actually sure which one it is. But given the car is 6 volts, I'm just going to say it's a generator. All the websites listed as a dynamo, so that doesn't really tell me anything. It isn't. Look at these tiny little fingers. Oh God. Everything on this engine is adorable. Here's the clutch. It looks like it's all right. I'll probably end up replacing it anyway while I'm in here, but looks fine. But look how small it is. It's just so tiny. But the flywheel is rather surprisingly held on by a gigantic nut rather than a bunch of little screws. I don't think I've ever seen that before. I've got the flywheel nut off. I think I can take the flywheel off just as easily after I split the crankcase in half. But before I do that, all the bolts are on the bottom here. I don't have a surface on the top to roll it over, so I'm going to reattach the cylinders, just kind of sit them on top here so I have a flat surface to set the engine on. Or maybe this is a terrible idea, I don't know. I already decided that was a bad idea, and I made these little scrap wood engine stand thingies. Look at that, it's like a proper engine stand, but with spider nests in it. Oh my God, that's gross. There we go, there's one. Let's put my knee into the action. There we go, that was the ticket. I consulted my poorly translated manual and it told me to split the crankcase by applying slight blows with a rubber hammer, which I'm guessing is a poor translation of whack it with your tappy-go-lucky stick until it comes apart. So I'm going to do that. I think the years of grease are creating a glue. All right, I feel like I'm missing something because the crankcase isn't coming apart like it should. So I'm going to wait until I can take this flywheel off, just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Because the manual, poorly translated as it was, did say to take the flywheel off first. For actually pulling off the flywheel, the poorly translated manual recommends a specialty tool that screws into these two M14 bolt holes on the flywheel, and it's basically just a gear puller. Now, I bought these M14 bolts to screw into these holes, and I was going to make my own version of that, but instead, as you can clearly see, I'm just using the giant gear puller. So hopefully this will work. Forgot this bit. I don't know that this is working. Oh, it's not working. Oh, it's pulling the starter ring gear off. Back. All right, that didn't work, so I had an alternate idea. These bolts that I have in the flywheel here, where the actual specialty tool flywheel puller would bolt into, I think I'm just going to screw those through and sort of bear on the crankcase housing itself, and maybe that'll push the flywheel out. I did grind a little bit of a taper on any of these bolts so that it's at least pushing on a point or a flat-ish surface. So hopefully, I think the flywheel just fell off. Yep. Wow, that worked amazingly well. There's a ring here clamping the two halves together. So I was right. There is something behind the flywheel holding the two halves of the crankcase together. Good thing I didn't pry even harder than I already did. And off the delicate ring comes. Unfortunately, my exuberant efforts to pry these two crankcase halves apart, I did actually break this ring. There's a little chip out on one of these screw holes here, and I need to replace this ring. I probably don't, because it's just on one corner, but I'm going to do it anyway just to be safe. I think that was it. Oh, yeah. I believe, before I take this crankshaft out of here, this whole assembly, I have to remove something over here. I believe. I'm not sure. I could be wasting my time. Another little tidbit of information, if you don't know, the Trabant does not have a distributor. It just has 2 points down here. And here's the mechanical advance mechanism. You see how it works? When it starts spinning out, the weights spread and it changes the timing. Both sides at once. There we go. All right, I'm an idiot that forgot to hit record. So here's what you missed. I got the top half of the crankcase separated from the crankshaft. I had to go buy a new axle nut, 32 millimeter, to take this in nut off. Actually, now that I point that out, I didn't need to do that to take this crankshaft out. That's just for this pulley to come off. So I didn't need to do that. Now I'm caught up too. And that's pretty much all you missed. Now the crankshaft is out of the crankcase housing entirely, and I'm going to go set this off to the side. With the crankshaft out of the car, I can clearly see that I need a new crankshaft assembly. This whole thing, as far as I'm aware, is just pressed together. Like these connection rod bearings, you can see there's no way to take the connection rod off. It presses together right there, and it's assembled in place. And the reason I need to replace this is because listen to this bearing. That sounds fine. It's the only one. Listen to this other one. Garbage, garbage, and then this one. Slightly less garbage, but still garbage. And I already mentioned the rotary valves need replacing because they're all wallered out on the pins. But on further inspection, I realized that this one, it isn't the rotary valve that's bad. It's the actual pin that it rides on. There's a deep groove cut into the locating pin, which is no good at all. It needs a new pin in there, and I can't do that. So, whole new crankshaft assembly is required for this engine. And that's it. The Trabant engine is now disassembled down to its smallest and most complex component, this crankshaft here. The obvious next step is I need to reassemble this engine again with new parts, and I'll be doing that in part 2. But don't expect part 2 to be out for a while because I have to source and order all these parts from Germany. So I'll have to wait for all those parts to ship and obviously reassemble the engine before the video can come out. So that'll be out, I don't know, a month or two, something like that. Until then, thanks for watching, and thanks again to Tite-Reach extension wrenches for sponsoring this video.